There we go. Red light's on. We're good to go. Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sam Furio. I'm the outreach coordinator for the building decarbonization team at the Maryland Department of the Environment. I will be moderating this afternoon session. For those of you that haven't met the building decarbonization team before, we've got all three of us here today helping out with this informational session. So I just want to take a second to introduce two other team members. Christopher Menser, the building decarbonization technical specialist. Chris, if you want to come on camera, say hey. There he is. Thanks, Chris. So we're joined by Chris and also Dr. Zach Brazola, building decarbonization section head, aka Dr. Decarb. He's on camera now. There he is.
Hey, everybody.
All right. Always good to have.
We got a great team here working on this. We have a great team here working on this today. So, and in general. So, glad you're all here to join us, and look forward to this session.
Sounds good. Thanks, Zach. Well, thank you both, and thank you all for joining Campus Compliance Working Group Session 2. This afternoon, Dr. Decarb, Zach, who is just on camera, will be talking through BEPS campuses and the available campus compliance pathway with a focus on relevant definitions and frequently asked questions. So as per usual with these informational sessions, if you've done them before, this session will be recorded and uploaded to the BEPS YouTube playlist, which I think we're going to drop in the chat for you right about now. If you have missed any of our previous informational sessions or require any of the materials distributed during each session, you can view previous recordings on this playlist. And all materials distributed during each session are posted in the video description on YouTube. The chat has been disabled. If you'd like to ask a question during this session, there will be a portion for live Q&A at the end, but please bear with us as we go through our presentation first. In order to submit questions for the Q&A, you'll need to click on the Activities button, which is in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Chris just dropped some instructions on questions there as well in the chat. But Activities button, bottom right-hand corner of the screen, circle, triangle, square, hover over it, it says Activities, that's where you need to go. Everything you need to do in the informational session is accessible via that button. So Q&A feature is accessible via there, and we're also going to be doing a poll at the beginning. See how y'all are handling your campuses, and you can access the poll feature via that button as well. So circle, triangle, square, that's where you need to go. As per usual, we'll work to address all questions during this session as time allows. If we are unable to answer your question during this session, we will work to address them in future BEPS informational sessions. And so before diving in, if you require an overview of BEPS, we would point you to previous webinars and technical documentation that is currently available for viewing on the department's BEPS website. You can get to that website via the QR code on the left side of the screen. Search Maryland BEPS in Google, mde.maryland.gov/BEPS. There's a bunch of different ways to get there, but that website should have what you need. The QR code on the right side of the screen will take you to the BEPS communications list sign-up form. If you want to get relevant updates on the proposed regulation, that's a good place to go and put your name down, and we'll send out some email blasts to that list. Today's webinar is focused on a specific aspect of BEPS implementation, but if you have any questions regarding the proposed regulation, you may contact our team via the email address or phone number at the bottom of your screen. So with that, and I think Chris just dropped some of the links in the chat for the email list. So yeah, please sign up for that if you want to get updates on the reg. So agenda for this campus compliance session 2, we're going to do that poll question that I mentioned, and then I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Decarb to go through a brief recap of the last session Session 1, relevant definitions for the campus compliance pathway and campuses within BEPS. And then we're going to go through general pathway information again, just to make sure everyone's up to speed. And then we're doing 20 questions with Dr. Decarb, working to address some of those lingering questions from session 1 that we didn't get to. And then finally, if we have time, we're going to get into Q&A for today. So with that, let's move into the poll. So again, if maybe you just joined, Chris just launched the poll for us. Thanks, Chris. Circle, triangle, square, activities button. That's how you get to the poll, bottom right-hand corner of your screen. So that should be live now. We want to see, how are you planning to benchmark your campus buildings? First option, benchmark whole campus together and apply for campus compliance. You're going to benchmark your buildings separately, and you're still unsure and you're trying to decide. So let's give it a few minutes there. They've got 35 people on the call, and 12 votes in. So I want to see some more votes come in. We'll give it just another minute or so. How are you planning to benchmark your campus buildings? Together, separately, or unsure? Okay, looks like we're hanging steady at 17 votes. And the majority of folks are planning to benchmark their whole campus together and apply for the available campus compliance pathway. So 10 votes for that. And then 4 folks are going to benchmark the building separately, and 4 are still undecided. So thank you for that feedback. It's okay if you're still trying to decide. We hope today you'll get some of your questions answered on the campus compliance pathway and see if which pathway is right for you. So I think we can end that poll and move into Dr. Decarb's section. Going to talk about some relevant definitions for you all and frequently asked questions. So with that, I'll hand it over to Zach Brazola, section head of Building Decarbonization Team. So take it away, Zach, whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Sam, and thank you all for joining us today. I know campus compliance, we're deep in the weeds here. You all had a ton of great questions at the end of last time, and we know we didn't get to them all, so that's really the goal for today. But as part of that, and based on feedback we received, we want to just go over a couple of key things we discussed last time, because I think this relates to a lot of questions folks have. So the very first thing is, what is a covered building? And this may sound like, oh, it's 35,000 square feet. It's a building over 35,000 square feet, but there's actually a little bit more nuance here that's in the proposed regulation. And this is what we wanted to talk about. So I want to draw your attention here. A covered building means a building that is a commercial or multifamily residential building in the state of Maryland or owned by the state of Maryland and has a gross floor area of 35,000 square feet or more, excluding the parking garage area. And it is a single building. One or more buildings held in the condominium form of ownership with that gross floor area over 35,000 square feet or more, excluding the parking garage area, and governed by a single board of managers. Or, and this one starts to get relevant into this discussion, 2 or more buildings with a combined gross floor area of 35,000 square feet or more, excluding the parking garage area, that are served in whole or part by the same electric or gas meter, or are served by the same heating or cooling system or systems, which is not a district energy system. And so this one, we get this question a lot about, I've got only 1 meter and a couple of buildings on it. That actually, all those buildings become a singular covered building, because from the eyes of the reporting under the law, that's all being looked at as one building's energy use. Unless those buildings are kind of individually metered and not on and have different meters, that's kind of what gets covered here. So I bring this up for this reason. Let's go to the next slide. So let's talk about what a campus is. A campus is a collection of 2 or more buildings of any building type or size that act as a single cohesive property with a single shared primary function and are owned and operated by the same party. So that's how a campus is defined in the proposed regulation. And there is actually, I'll note, and we talked about this last time, there's this opportunity where if you own a building on a campus that's not owned by the main campus, you can actually bring that in. A good example might be a privately owned dorm on a university campus, but ultimately that's in the service of the university. They might bring that into their campus compliance. It might even use steam from the campus, so it might be a good reason to put it into the campus. But generally, it's a single cohesive property. That campus. The owner of a covered building may choose, though, so that's what a campus is, and you can choose, if you meet that campus definition, you can choose to meet the net direct emission standards under the regulation at the campus level instead of the individual building level. When 2 or more covered buildings are connected to a district energy system, served by that same electric or gas meter, or served by the same heating or cooling system or systems, which is not a district energy system. So the whole idea here is campus compliance, and what we're talking about today is an additional flexibility for compliance with the requirements under the regulation. Nobody has to do campus compliance. If 0 people applied for campus compliance pathway, that's totally fine. You're going to comply with the standard pathway. And in the Q&A we'll get to later, there's a whole bunch of kind of questions we got around this, so I wanted to put this back up and be very explicit. So what does it actually have to mean when you do campus compliance? Well, when you're doing campus level reporting, you shall include energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions for all buildings and stationary equipment located on the campus, including all central plants, except as provided. Basically, it does not include energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions from activities or sources that are excluded from the benchmarking report requirements in whatever regulation text. We put it up here because it's spelled out so that if you ever want to, you can go back and look at the regulation and the accompanying technical manual, where honestly the most things about campus compliance are. All this is to say is, it includes all central plants unless it's excluded from benchmarking for a standard building. Things like EV charging, things like food service facilities. If you've got a required fuel-fired equipment that a law says you must use, then, or is required to be fuel-fired, then that could be excluded, for example. So those are all things under that 0.02 section, if you, what we're talking about. I actually think, actually, I'm going to do some of that in a minute too. But all buildings mean even buildings that are under 35,000 square feet on that campus. And this is the #1 question we get asked. And the whole reasoning behind this is you're doing this at the campus in large part because you have no way to distinguish between covered buildings and non-covered buildings, or you want to, and you're providing shared district fuel or something like that on your campus theme, for example, to those buildings. But you can exempt buildings if they're BEPS exempt buildings can be excluded from campus reporting if you have the way to do so, namely submetering for the most part. So let's go to the next slide. The following buildings shall be excluded from campus level calculations: a building designated as historic property under federal, state, or local law, a public or non-public elementary or secondary school building, a manufacturing building, an agricultural building, or a building owned by the federal government. So those are the exempt BEPS buildings. And the same thing applies on the campus level calculations. Let's, yeah, and if you're interested in learning more about the exemption categories I just talked about, we had a whole separate working group session earlier this week on exemptions, and that presentation will be up on our YouTube playlist probably sometime next week. So if you missed that and want to find out more, there's a whole bunch on all these different exemptions and things like that. So we probably won't, if you've got questions about that, I'm going to just send you to that, to look at that recording of that session. And there's a feedback form for some of the the specific applications we have for that section. And I'll just note there's also a few other exemptions, such as demolished buildings or completely unoccupied buildings that aren't quite listed here, but it's the general idea. So I talked a little bit earlier about energy exclusions, and we were going a little bit more detail here right on the slide for you. Campus level reporting does not include energy consumption and fuel use from activities and sources that are excluded from the benchmarking report requirements in the regulation. You can see more on this in the technical manual, section A2.1.4. Those activities and sources are food service facilities, electric vehicle charging, other electricity uses excluded by the benchmarking tool. Good examples are cell towers. There's a list in the technical manual of about 8 different things that are really not about buildings that can be excluded. And then emissions from required combustion equipment. I talked about that earlier. So whole bunch there, but that's really just recapping for everyone here what the requirements are. And again, you can look at this presentation afterwards if you've got questions. All of this is spelled out very nicely in the technical manual. Unlike the regulation, which is written as a regulation, the technical manual has more details and is a little bit more plain language layout for reviewing it. You can find that through our website. And I think we're going to drop the link in the chat directly to it if we haven't already. Maybe Chris, if you could drop that in the chat, that'd be great. But it is also on our website. So in sum, all of that to say, really, if you're a campus, you have 2 options. You can report only the covered buildings on your campus, including any district energy use by those buildings. And that's the standard pathway. And that's meeting, but you have to, those are for those buildings that meet that covered building definition. You can also report as a campus and choose that campus compliance option, all the buildings and energy use on the campus, which is applying and going through this. And so that's the key thing here, is that really there's 2 ways that campus compliance is really an option if you want to simplify your reporting in many cases. So you don't have to do accounting of district energy or other kind of details of how those buildings all work out. So that's key. And when you do campus compliance, we'll talk a little bit about this later too, but there's a little bit of a application process we talked about last time. But that application process allows for kind of working with MDE compliance to work out exactly what's on your campus, how you're capturing it all, any kind of unique or specific needs to your specific campus. Most buildings, 95% of them, are not going to need to do anything around campus compliance, and they won't need to do anything complicated for reporting. But there are a handful of really big campuses with complicated things, and we're going to have to work with those folks if they go down this campus compliance pathway. So that's kind of in the implementation phase of things after you've submitted the campus compliance application. So let's go to the next slide. So it's really important to note campuses have the same reporting and compliance deadlines as single property buildings, single buildings. Benchmarking data must be input into Energy Star Portfolio Manager by June 1st of every year. The first reporting deadline is June 1st, 2025, so that's coming up super quick. The report should have all data from the previous calendar year, January 1 through December 31st. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you all for those of you that submitted feedback. We really appreciate the time you took to review the feedback to review the guidance document and provide feedback after the last session. We take that feedback as we do in all these sessions. We review it all. If we've got quick answers that we can provide in the FAQ today, we've done that. And then if we've got also some edits maybe to the guidance that we are going to make. So you'll see that as we finalize the guidance in all these different sessions. We've been using all that feedback to refine, improve, make it clearer for everybody what you have to do and what's included. So thank you again for all your feedback. We really appreciate it. And again, I said this, but I'm going to reiterate, a theme in the feedback was just that there's a lot of complexity on campuses, and that's definitely something we're going to handle as part of this campus compliance application if you go down that pathway. We also might leave the guidance itself a little bit more high level, because 95% of these buildings, and even most things that might go towards a little bit of a campus, are not going to deal with those very unique things that we could never write a guidance that captures the uniqueness of every single campus around the state. So just giving that kind of blanket statement to everybody. And with that, I think that's the main content we just wanted to review from last time.
Thank you for that, Zach. And with that, we're moving into the 20 questions with Dr. Decarb portion of today's session. So I'll give Zach a breather there for a minute, get a drink of water, and then we'll move into reviewing questions that you all had asked during session 1 that we did not have the chance to get to. So we'll review those today, and then as time allows, we'll address any questions you submit in this Q&A at the end. Same story. If we don't get to your questions that you submit today, we'll work to address them in future BEPS informational sessions. And you can always reach out to us at beps.mde@maryland.gov or give us a call, and we'll work to address your questions. All right, Dr. Decarb, you ready? We'll start moving through these FAQs.
Let's do it.
All right, cool. So, question 1 for you, Zach. What is a shared energy metering setup, and do all buildings need to be serviced by the same account? And I think we'll move over to the answer and let Dr. Decarb walk you through it, and we'll keep that set up for each question as we go through.
Great. Yeah. So really, I think what the person is asking here is, some of the different ways you might have shared energy metering is you're connected to a district energy system, you're served by the same electric or gas meter, or you're served by the same heating or cooling system or systems that's not a district energy system. I think we have a little bit of a typo here, but ultimately, to that person's question, any of those things could be different, energy meters that you might have, and you don't necessarily have to be on the same utility account for that. You could have separate, you could have a shared gas meter and a shared electric meter by 2 different providers, or you could have, so that could be the way. But if you've got building A and building B, and they've got 2 different meters, even if they're on the same account, but this is meter A and this is meter B, and all under owner A's account with somebody, those are 2 different meters for the building, and you can input things at the meter level in Portfolio Manager, so those are separate. So that's a little bit different there. Account is often tied, like it just depends on who you're talking about. Is it like when you log into your utility provider, your account versus the account number? Sometimes utilities vary a little bit, but sometimes the account number is your meter number, and sometimes it's like, I am a big university, for example, I have one account with my utility, but I might have 5, 6, 7, 10 meters all under that. So hopefully that helps to clarify things a little bit. Let's go to the next one.
Moving on, question 2. All right. Are buildings less than 35,000 square feet included in campus reporting?
Yeah, again, I mentioned this earlier, but we again want to hit this home. Campus compliance is an option. And if you want to comply at the campus level, you do include all buildings less than 35,000 square feet. And that's because you're including the whole campus in your compliance or in your plan. And it's usually because they're all on a district energy system. And so doing the sub-metering to just look at your individual buildings might not be something you want to do. Also, you might find that gives you flexibility. Maybe you want to do work on and efficiency improvements to certain buildings because they're due anyway. And that helps you as a campus meet the standards in the interim by working and triaging across your campus in different ways in a way you might have already been planning to do, right? If you're planning to do a bunch of work on some, again, I'll use a university example because that's kind of one of the main ideas of folks that might use this. If you're planning to do some work on a dormitory and it's 29,000 square feet, it's also served on your campus system. You might decide, well, that dorm and a whole bunch of them are going and doing really well and maybe going to net zero direct greenhouse gas emissions here next year. That can reduce our overall emissions from our campus when we look at it and help us meet those interim standards while we kind of triage some of the other projects. And so it really is a flexibility. I think a lot of folks have gotten wrapped around the axle in the like definitions of what's in and out. The core idea, I mean, it's written very clearly in the regulation and the technical manual of like what it is, but it's all about flexibility. We're not saying you have to do this. We're not saying that this is the way if you're a campus. We think some people might do it. If nobody does it, that's okay. So, and this, as I said, this is in the regulation. Campus level reporting shall include energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions for all buildings and stationary equipment located on the campus, including all central plants. But that could make your reporting a lot easier because rather than trying to associate the emissions from your district plant and ultimately, I'll talk about this a little more, getting into some more complicated math, you just say, well, we delivered so many therms of natural gas to the campus. We delivered so many kilowatt hours of electricity and so many gallons of diesel for use in our combined plant as well or something. So that's what this is all about.
Thank you, Zach. All right. Question 3, whenever you're ready. Are the emissions from buildings under 35,000 square feet on a campus counted as part of the BEPS performance standard? Think you could walk us through this answer?
Yep. So again, if you choose the optional campus compliance pathway, then you would include energy consumption for all buildings and stationary equipment located on the campus. And that then factors into the performance standard. This total energy consumption is used to calculate those emissions for the buildings. So it is working towards the standard, but you're also accounting for the total square footage of all those buildings when you are looking at the standard.
Great. Thank you, Zach. All right, question 4, moving right along, making great time. What if I have a district energy system on my campus, but only want to report buildings covered under BEPS, those over 35,000 square feet, that is?
Yep.
And let me get the answer on there.
Totally. Yeah, so in this case, you're really going to be reporting like a normal individually covered building under the standard pathway. But per the requirements under BEPS, you must report all energy used by that building, including thermal inputs such as steam from a district energy plant, steam, hot water, chilled water. So you're going to need to be able to provide the electricity, the fuel, the steam consumption for that building. A lot of campuses, even if they've got a district system, they have some sub-metering because they're tracking their performance of those buildings already. So then you're good. You're going to use that sub-meter data. You're going to just report for that individual building and things are set. If you're not already sub-metering those buildings, you would need to add meters to your building for any of those end uses, and that includes things like the steam too, or for any of those fuel uses and things including the steam. So that's really, I think where a lot of people are wondering, and that's kind of the key answer here.
Great. Thank you, Zach. Moving right along. Question 5. Does MDE have any requirements on the accuracy of submeters used if not taking the campus compliance pathway?
Yeah, so this builds basically right on that previous question. And the whole point is if you're going to put those in, how accurate do they have to be? We don't specify, and MDE really doesn't, from our perspective, we don't specify accuracy of submetering. That's required. That's outside of the purview of the regulation. However, take a step back. You're attesting when you submit this that you're submitting an accurate report of your energy use. And there will be third-party verification as part of all of this as well. And so it has to stand up to the engineering rigors of your saying this is an accurate report, and a third-party verifier would agree with that opinion. So that is the requirements, and we leave it up to the campus, to anyone doing this, to kind of determine what is appropriate.
Thank you, Zach. Making great time. Question 6. I'll let you get a drink of water. And at this point, I'll pitch again. We're halfway through the show today. If you guys have questions, Q&A feature, bottom right-hand corner of the screen, activities button, that's where you need to go. Circle, triangle, square. Let us know what you're thinking. And we'll work to address those questions after Dr. Decarb runs through these session 1 questions and as time allows. So with that, pitching you question 6 when you're ready, Zach. What happens if a campus made up of multiple buildings that has a shared gas meter electrifies and goes to individual metering?
Yeah. Things change in buildings over time. We know even use types might change, so the standards would change over time. BEPS is flexible, so it has flexibility to adapt as things go. So if that building is no longer meeting the definition of a covered building, which I shared earlier today, then you can apply for exemption. You might still, even if you do submetering, you might still meet the definition. I don't know that your particulars, but you can apply and say, well, I've changed up this. Now I've got building A, B, and C, and they're all on their own meters, and they're all under 35,000 square feet, and they don't have any shared systems. You document that, put it in an application. The MDE compliance team will review it, and you go from there. And we specifically have that application for buildings that don't meet the definition of a covered building. So that's kind of how that would work.
Thank you for that. All right, moving on. Question 7. Our campus has street and pedestrian lighting throughout the campus. Do we need to report energy from outdoor lighting that is not associated with any particular building?
Yep, good question. This is campus compliance, so this is the kind of things we want to be talking about. Yes, we checked in with Portfolio Manager. They have a really great frequently asked questions help desk. So for a lot of these questions where it's like, how do I report and benchmark this thing, just more generally, not specifically even MDE's requirements, that's going to be our go-to, and it can be for you too. If those street and pedestrian lighting are separately metered, then you can exclude them from your campus, because that's basically Portfolio Manager says that street and pedestrian lighting is not building energy use. That's separate. I will note, outdoor lighting on a building is generally included in reporting for that building, because that's kind of part of most buildings. And so as you think about this, and this is kind of always a good step back for anybody working on reporting through Portfolio Manager, the whole point is you're trying to compare your building's energy use to other buildings of that type, right? So most commercial buildings have some sort of perimeter outdoor lighting, on the front entrance, or, on the sign that's on the wall of the building. That's included because that's just standard for most buildings. And so that's maybe a good example of kind of taking that thinking opportunity to actually ask yourself the questions too, But here, like street lighting and lighting on a big long kind of for that street, or a pedestrian big mall or something like that, that's very much not a standard use in a building, and so it's excluded. And Portfolio Manager has the specific guidance here actually on street lights and traffic lights. So I hope that helps answer what you were asking about.
Great. Thanks so much, Zach. And that link you see on the screen, we just dropped it in the chat for you. But if you lose track of that, again, the materials are posted in the video description when we upload it to YouTube. So you can find those there, and we'll send out an email blast when this video gets uploaded. So you don't need to keep checking. We'll make sure we ping you when it's ready to go. So with that, we can move on to question 8. All right, Zach, if I have a single meter for 2 buildings within my campus, should I enter that utility data at the campus level, or can I link the 2 buildings?
Yeah, the answer, as with many good engineering questions, is it depends. And so if you're taking this optional campus compliance pathway, you're going to be aggregating meters and your energy use at the campus level. So it doesn't really matter what you're doing at the building level. In fact, it very well could look like a campus compliance report, could very well look like to MDE, one single number for natural gas use, or well, not one, monthly, 12 numbers, one for each month for natural gas use, and 12 numbers for electricity use for, gas and electric meters. And that's, and the total floor area for all that. And that's it. Because as part of actually campus compliance, you're going to submit a little bit more information. And I think we're going to get into this a little bit later of like the area weighted standards and things like that. But you're going to submit an application that says, here's all my buildings and the floor area and their use types. So that would come separately, and Portfolio Manager really is just a vehicle for delivering this kind of very key, very high level information. Now, that's not going to be the case. Some of you are already benchmarking your whole campus. You've got individual buildings because you're using Portfolio Manager for other uses like it was designed to, like tracking your energy use and emissions of individual buildings on your campus. And so if you've got that set up, how it ends up reporting to MDE might be a little bit different. So I just caveat that. But that's at the campus level. Now, if you're going building by building, doing a standard compliance pathway with BEPS for Maryland, since these 2 buildings have a shared meter, they're going to meet that definition of a single covered building. You'd report the total floor area and use types, for that joint building, I'll call it, under one Portfolio Manager entry. If you're both listed on the covered buildings list, like if both buildings are listed, but you're going to report them as a singular building, because you can't separate out the energy went to building A and the energy went to building B. If you have no way of doing that, they're one building. And so under the way you would report. And in that case, this is kind of a unique use for campus compliance form, but it's just the same thing. You would say, hey, I've got these 2 buildings. They've got a shared meter. And so I'm reporting it as one. And then we'd pull off one of the 2 buildings on our covered buildings list and update it that basically says, here, this building is the floor area of both. So that's kind of hopefully helpful here of it goes both ways in whichever way you're going forward with compliance.
Thanks for that. Okay. Question 9. Is a building with multiple shops a campus or a building? Think you'd run through this with us?
Yeah, that's a building. So if we go back to the definition of a covered building, it's all about who owns its ownership, but also like defining what is a building. And a building is defined in the proposed regulation by the International Building Code, all about one big structure basically. What is the outside walls and things like that are structural and weather tight and things like that. So you've got multiple shops under one actual standalone building. That's going to be considered in the eyes of statewide BEPS a single building. And I know that's a little different if you're used to Montgomery County's reporting, but that's how the kind of Climate Solutions Now Act says a building, and that's how our definition of a building falls using the International Building Code. So that owner of the overall building is going to be responsible for reporting to MDE. That building owner is going to request aggregated energy data for all their tenants, the multiple different shops, from their utility. And if there's 5 or more tenants within that building, they can actually just automatically ask for an aggregated request. Or if there's 4 or fewer, they're going to need to get consent, which could be through a lease agreement, to get that data from the utility. So that's how that would work.
Thank you for that. All right. Question 10, whenever you're ready, Dr. Decarb, what are emissions factors and how do they factor into campus compliance?
Yes. So emissions factors, for the most part, if you're used to, if your campus, you're doing like, your own greenhouse gas accounting, you might have your own emissions factors. That's not quite happening here. For most buildings reporting to MDE, your the emissions factors and your total emissions is getting calculated in Portfolio Manager. That's what it was built for. But if where emissions factors comes in is within the context of district energy providers within BEPS. So emissions factors are calculated by district energy providers using the efficiency method, which is documented in the technical manual. We linked to it earlier. And district energy providers submit that to MDE with documentation of their calculations and the inputs and everything that kind of goes into figuring out through this efficiency method the fuel that goes into thermal inputs for buildings, basically. And those emissions factors are provided to covered building owners who are connected to a district energy system, because those could be unique and in fact very much are often unique to the different district energy systems and their input fuels, if they've got waste inputs or how efficient the whole system is. So every district system might have its own district energy emissions factors, which is why they need to be reported to MDE and shared with building owners. We have a whole form for that. We're running a district energy working group. So I think, Sam, when is it? Is it next week? Is it the week after?
It's the 19th.
The 19th, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So 2 weeks from now, we're running that district energy working group. And we'll get into these details even more there. So if this was your question or you have more questions on district energy, I'm really going to suggest you come you come to that session. But I wanted to just get everybody familiar. And the reason in a campus context you might have to do this, one of the benefits of doing campus compliance is that you don't have to do all this calculations if you're doing that campus compliance pathway, because you're just talking about fuel input to the campus, including that plant, and then saying, I don't really care what's going on with all my individual buildings. I'm just saying I've got this one big campus. But if your campus, you've got a district energy system, you're not doing that campus compliance pathway, you're doing the standard reporting, then you're going to need to do these emissions factor calculations so that individual buildings on your campus can report the emissions from their district energy consumption. So it does factor in here. It's all documented in the TM if you want to learn more about what goes into calculating it. But that does exist. Obviously, if you're a one-owner campus, you're not going to have to, you're still going to have to provide documentation to MDE of how you did your calculations, but you don't need to send it to, you won't need to send it to anyone because you just send it to yourself. So that kind of streamlines part of the process.
Great, thank you, Zach. And just as we had mentioned, District Energy Working Group Session 1 coming up in about 2 weeks. It's on the 19th. And I just dropped the informational session sign-up form, a link in the chat, and you can sign up for that session there, and we'll get a link to you like we've been doing for the campus working group. So works exactly the same. And if you can't make it, I know it's getting close to the holiday. We'll record that session as well and put it up on the YouTube playlist so you can watch it at a later date. So form should be in the chat for you there. And with that, I think we may have had another addition here on District Energy. I don't know if you wanted to use this table for a second, Zach.
Yeah, I mean, I've expounded upon this one to death a little bit. This is just summarizing a lot of the words I've been saying. So it's here for anybody referencing it. We showed this last time too. But basically, when you do building level reporting, you've got to do kind of this emission factor calculation. So I think, Sam, if we're ready, let's move to the next question.
Works for me. All right. Question 11. How are emission standards calculated for campuses? It's a lengthy one, but think you can run through that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. And I got into this earlier. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. But BEPS emission standards for campus with multiple use types, right? There are campuses that you might be a hospital and you're all general surgery hospital. That's going to be very simple because it's just going to be a hospital use type. But even in that case, there's often a few different use types. It depends a little bit on the specifics, but most campuses are going to have multiple different use types. And so stepping back for a second, right? If you're a standard building and you're an office, you're a multifamily housing, the BEPS proposed regulation has a specific emissions standard per square foot listed in the regulation. If you're a mixed use building, right, you've got some office and some housing, you're going to have an area weighted standard that you've got to meet. And it's literally the formula. Actually, it's going to be on the next page, so I won't go into it, but I put it in here again for completeness. Can be found in the technical manual. So that appropriate emission standard will be calculated for every building based on the floor area and the associated property types submitted in your benchmarking report. So that's a single building, and honestly, the same thing happens at a campus. If you've got many use types and you're taking that campus compliance pathway, your reporting could be as simple as the total floor area for that campus and the total energy used on the campus. And so as part of your report, your application, you're going to list, here's all my buildings, all the use types, and all the square footage associated with those use types for all the buildings on my campus. And we're going to then do that calculation for your area weighted standard for the whole campus. And that's going to be unique to your campus based on all of the different use types and exclusions and whatever it is, or exemptions and whatever it is for your campus. So that is the long-winded, not quick answer. But I think on the next slide, Sam, this is the formula. Again, we're not going to go through it, but it's a very standard area weighted formula for determining what the area weighted GHG interim standards are for campuses, or for any building, and the same thing applies to campus. It's in here for completeness.
Thank you for that. We're going to keep it moving. Question 12. All right, our campus has multiple energy inputs for heating and cooling, such as steam or electricity. Is Energy Star Portfolio Manager capable of accounting for these creative solution or situations?
Yeah, absolutely. Portfolio Manager is an industry standard tool, and it can capture a whole wide variety of situations. So you can enter things like steam, electricity, fuel oil that's delivered, natural gas. And even within those fuel types, you can enter a whole bunch of different meters. So maybe you've got 4 different streams coming in, electricity here, electricity there, a couple of different tanks. All of those can get entered into Portfolio Manager. There is extensive documentation on how to do all this online on the Portfolio Manager website. And if you've got questions, that FAQ we linked to earlier is also there. And again, just noting that one of the reasons you might follow the campus compliance pathway is you're more likely to be able to, you'll enter just that fuel input into your district plant and all your fuels at the, and any fuels and electricity used at the building level that's not captured on your main district plant meter, rather than steam to each building. So it just really depends. You might also just have one electricity meter for the whole campus. That also would work. So let's keep moving. I'm looking at the time. I know we've got a few more to get through.
All right, moving right along. We're going to speed it up a little. Question 13, when will the campus compliance forms be ready for us to start submitting?
Yeah, if you're raring to go, I'm glad you are. I'm glad you're here. You can already start gathering all the information because we put out the draft, and so we're making some tweaks, but most of that information will remain the same. So after the regulation's finalized, the forms will be available on the BEPS website. We'll provide a status update to everyone on our BEPS communication list. And this it came to the working group, when these forms are final and available for everybody. So coming soon, but not quite yet.
Thank you. Question 14, can I still report as a single campus even if I have multiple district energy systems on my campus?
So I'm assuming here in this case that you're saying I want to take the campus compliance pathway. And if you are, then yes, totally fine. You're going to report that total fuel input into all of the different systems and designate all the buildings on all those different systems as part of your one campus when applying. And again, this is assuming you're a single actual cohesive property campus meeting the campus definition. But in general, yes, it doesn't have to be limited to a single system. I know some campuses might have a steam loop, a hot water loop, a chilled water loop, even an ambient loop if they're getting fancy. So, and you might call those different systems, totally fine. Or you might have like an East Campus and a West Campus, and each has its own district plant. They're all on the same cohesive campus, totally fine.
Thank you. Question 15. How are we going to receive aggregate whole building data for our buildings?
Yeah, good question. This is also in the regulation if you ever want to read more details, but in summary, all the electric and gas companies in Maryland are required to provide aggregate whole building energy use data to building owners upon request. And that same thing if you're on a district energy system that isn't run by your campus. If you have delivered fuel, you're going to need to obtain that information directly from your providers, but you're usually getting a bill every time you get delivery, so you just have to enter that. And in 2025, those electric and gas companies have 90 days to provide you, the requester, with whole building energy use data. So we're encouraging everyone to get the request in early to ensure that you get all your necessary data by the reporting deadline of June 1st, 2025. For reference, 90 days would be March 1st. And the information on how to request that, we're planning to have that all ready here shortly into the new year. So, but actually many folks, many of the utilities already have their portals set up because they're doing this in Montgomery County. And it's for the most part going to be a very online process of submitting a little bit of information to get the data.
Thank you. Question 16. Would I still be able to track individual buildings' energy use and emissions in Portfolio Manager under campus compliance?
Yeah, good question. The easiest way to comply under campus compliance pathway would be just to report that total at the campus level in a single entry. You totally can have individual buildings as well because you're just trying to track at the more granular level. You'll need to set up a parent-child relationship to do so. We're going to update the guide to include this. This was some feedback we got. Well, to have just at least a little bit of information about how you would do this. But ultimately, we're just going to point you to Portfolio Manager's information on how you benchmark a campus, which talks about this parent-child relationship. Again, it's not a requirement for MDE to do it this way, but this just makes it so that if you're already benchmarking, you can get it submitted.
Great, thank you. And just FYI to everyone, we dropped the link in the chat for that Portfolio Manager guidance that Zach just mentioned. So, all right, Zach, question 17. Can I enter my building and Portfolio Manager as a campus, even if we aren't considered a campus by BEPS?
Yeah, so for this one, from the proposed regulation, whole building energy consumption data means energy data that has been summed for an entire building, which could include a single building or a group of separately metered tenants, representing the cumulative total of energy used in the covered building. So it is what it sounds like it is. So ultimately, the answer to this question is that you're required to report individual buildings' whole building energy consumption data to MDE. So if you're not reporting as a campus under BEPS, you haven't done campus compliance, or one of those properties that lets you sum them up, you really should not be submitting a campus to MDE through Portfolio Manager. At the end of the day, the answer here really is no. But I will note kind of that same thing I was talking about with parent-childs. There might be a way, if you're doing this for some other reason, you might be able to work it out. This is the same link we had on the previous slide. You might be able to work out a parent-child to meet our requirement, which is individual buildings, but also still have somewhere in, like you can have 2 individual buildings and then create a parent for yourself that has those 2 together as your campus that's separate from anything you do for MDE. So, hopefully that, the answer is no, but there's a way to make this work for your specific situation probably, and you can reach out to Portfolio Manager Help Desk to learn more and ask questions as you're trying to do it.
All right, I think that's this is the last one for us for session 1 questions. Does your list of potentially covered buildings include tax-exempt buildings?
Yeah, and I know this is mostly not campus, but we wanted to answer it because it comes up. So first and foremost, level setting tax exemption status does not influence whether you're a covered building or not in BEPS. Look at the definition of the covered building to find out if you're covered. But in terms of your inclusion on the potentially covered buildings list, we relied largely on the state's tax assessor data to create the potentially covered buildings list. So some taxes, some buildings especially, might not have the most up-to-date data. As a result, a tax-exempt building might not be on that list. However, if you meet the definition of a covered building, you will still need to you still need to comply with the regulation. And so it doesn't really matter, if you're not on the list right now, but you're a covered building, you do need to join the program. And we'll have a form to update that list. And we're always working to refine that list. And we'll be releasing any refinements we've gotten kind of in the interim and as we work with folks kind of as we go. But really after the regulation's finalized, we're going to work to have just some revisions to the list. So that's all coming, but we do have the preliminary version of that list up on the website right now so you can look. But again, if you're a covered building, you are covered. But you can apply for exemption if you're on the list or you're on and you are exempt. So hope that answers it.
Thanks, Zach. And with that, 3:59, and I can't let Dr. Decarb take the whole spotlight today, so I got to get my spiel in at the end. So I don't think we're going to have any time for session 2 questions during today's session, but we really do appreciate all of you submitting questions in the Q&A, and we will work to address them in future BEPS informational sessions. And I know we dropped a lot of links in the chat, but we're going to upload this video to YouTube, BEPS YouTube playlist, and we're going to link all the materials in the video description so you can access them whenever you need them. But as usual, we really appreciate everyone attending the informational sessions, and we hope that you can join us for the District Energy Working Group Session 1 on December 19th, and we hope to see you at future informational sessions if you can't make that one. But again, thanks for attending, and hope you all have a nice holiday, and we'll see you soon. Thanks so much, and thanks, Zach, for answering all those questions.